Welcome, everyone. You found Sanctuary's Coffee and Conversation Show. I'm Myrna Haskell, Executive Editor of Sanctuary Magazine. This is an online publication for women that empowers and inspires with a focus on the arts, philanthropy, health and wellness, culture, and community. You can find us at sanctuary-magazine.com. Today, I have two guests, which is super exciting. The first is Dr. Sherry Kelly. She is a licensed clinical psychologist and neuropsychologist who's an expert in childhood development. She is also the author of Your Tire Inside, which happens to be excerpted in the September issue of Sanctuary Magazine. So please look for that from our book excerpt section. And Sherry also happens to be a panel expert for Sanctuary. So I know many of you that follow our channel regularly recognize Sherry. We also have Cindy Parseghian. She is the co-founder of the Parseghian Medical Research Foundation, and this foundation is aiming to find a cure for the rare childhood disease Niemann-Pick Type C. The foundation is named after the late Parseghian, who was a former professional football coach and beloved Notre Dame University. Football player and beloved Notre Dame University football coach. And I wanted, before I dive into Cindy talking about the foundation and Sherry talking about her book, I found this really great, if you can bear with me for just a moment, description of the disease, since many of you who are listening might not be familiar. Niemann-Pick Type C disease is a genetic neurodegenerative disorder which causes progressive deterioration of the nervous system. It usually affects children by interfering with their ability to metabolize cholesterol. Large amounts of cholesterol accumulate within the liver, spleen, and brain. This metabolic disorder leads to a series of neurological problems that are ultimately fatal. There is currently no cure for the disease, but as we're going to learn today, Cindy's foundation is doing amazing work, and there's been lots of recent research that's found some incredible moving forward with trying to find the cure. So I want to start with Sherry for a little bit, because I know Your Tiger Inside is a book that talks about children dealing with emotions. Thank you, Sherry. And of course, you've decided to donate a portion of those proceeds to Cindy's foundation. So if you can take a moment to talk a little bit about your book and what you find so inspiring about this foundation and why you decided to donate to it.
Well, I think there's a spiritual component to this. It really is one of the things that we say to each other on campus at Notre Dame is Holy Spirit at work. And this is one of these things that happens amongst our greater community at Notre Dame. My dad was a huge fan of Coach Parseghian. And I grew up watching those games with dad in the 60s and early 70s. And I remember my dad saying, Era is a great leader of men. Okay. And that stuck with me. And now I had the honor of meeting Cindy a couple of years ago at a Hesburgh Women of Impact event at Notre Dame. And we just by coincidence sat next to each other. And I can tell you, Cindy is a great leader of women and men, everybody. She is an amazing leader, and I'm so honored to be working with her on this special project. I also felt it was important for me to give back. 10 years of my graduate training was largely spent in a hospital setting in New York, where I worked with children and families challenged by rare diseases. And it's a very unique community of people. And I learned so much. I own so much of my training and my knowledge to the parents and children that I worked with. So rare diseases have been in my heart. I feel I really wanted to partner with Cindy and the Parseghian Research Fund at Notre Dame to really make that impact, to give back, and also to use this as a platform to educate people about the fund and about the important research that they're doing, which is far-reaching.
Okay. Do you want to say anything a little bit about what your book teaches children?
Yeah,
Because
so
I
the
know
yeah,
you do have materials for primary
yeah,
grade educators, correct?
yes, educators and health professionals
Okay.
also. So the strategies that I developed in this book are ones I've been using for 35 years. Many of these strategies I actually developed while working with children who have rare diseases. And it's really a book that is meant to help young children understand what their emotions and feelings are, not to be afraid of them, not to push them down, but to harness the energy of their emotions so they can use that energy to take action, to get what they need, and really to communicate with others what is it that might help them feel better and to grow. So often as children, they're they're getting messages that their emotions are bad or their emotions are wrong.
Mhm.
And in the book, I teach them through the story of two little kitties, Toby and Tabby.
And the illustrations are
Oh,
wonderful. Kathleen Kiefer, right? I mean,
yes,
the expressions on the
yeah.
faces of the cartoon characters in the book are joyful. Yes.
Kathleen Kiefer, a wonderful artist from California who is a proud alumna of Notre Dame and a huge presence on the campus with her beautiful art.
So
So
this
I'm
is
just
all connected, ladies. All
all connected.
yes.
We're all connected. So the book really does teach young children, hey, and grown-ups, how not to judge your emotions, that your emotions are actually an alarm system. They are a protective mechanism. And actually, emotions are just that. They're a bioevolutionary protective mechanism that helps us survive, and that you listen to those emotions as an alarm bell or as an alert, telling you what you have to do, what you might need, where
Right.
you should go. So this way, children learn to accept their emotions without judgment and also learn how to speak about emotions in a way that grown-ups can understand and help them
I
better
love
cope.
that, Sherry. And some grown-ups still continue to have trouble dealing with their emotions as well, right? So I know this is a children's book, but I think we can all garner something from what you've just
Oh,
said there.
oh, thank you.
Absolutely. But I want to talk to Cindy a little bit now. Cindy lost three of her children to this disease, and she has taken that incredible grief journey and tragedy and has turned it into something good. But I wanted to start out, Cindy, by just asking you, can you say a little something about your children? And also, if as part of that answer, I think I've read, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that your children were born healthy. And so what were some of those signs or things that like
Mhm.
made the hairs on your arm stand up and say, oh my goodness, something's wrong?
So we had four beautiful children. And our second son, Mike, we had Era, our oldest, Michael, Marcia, and Christa. And when Michael was about 5 or 6 years old, I can remember saying to Michael, Michael, when I look you in the eye, please look me in the eye. I thought he was just being a distracted 5-year-old and that he just wasn't paying attention to the person. Um, but then he started having other symptoms. He couldn't keep up with the other kids on the playground. His speech became slurred and his handwriting was just atrocious. So my husband and I, my husband's a physician, started searching for an answer, what was going on with Michael. And it took us 2 years. And many tests, many doctors. We finally took him to Columbia University, who were specialists in another disease Michael had been tested for, but came back negative. And they took a 5-minute look at Michael. Now, the file by then was this thick on Michael, but they took a 5-minute look and said, we think it's Niemann-Pick Type C. And we said, why do you think that? And they said for two reasons. One, because of this eye movement problem, and because he had an enlarged spleen. Mm-hmm. When they said that, our girls who were not showing any symptoms at the time also had enlarged spleens. Okay, but Marcia, the middle child, the middle of those three, had been tested for some blood disorders and everything came back negative. And her development was, if anything, accelerated in the fact that she was skipping before any other friends. She was tying her shoes. She was reading before kindergarten. Just academically, she was surpassing all her peers. We took Michael home to Tucson, had him tested. When he tested positive for Niemann-Pick Type C disease, we had our other 3 children tested, and our 2 girls also came up positive. I got to go back to what Sherry was saying earlier about emotion. And I can tell you, I was so furious. I was furious at God. I was just could not believe that we were going to lose these 3 beautiful children. And I think my anger was what started the foundation. We did not sit back, but we said, we've got to do something. And my husband and I've had long discussion about it. I'll admit, I got a temper, right? But I think that's really was the impetus to get this going. So just kudos for you, Sherry, for writing this book to help children understand how to deal with their emotions. So we started a foundation, and it was 30 years ago next month.
Oh, wow.
And it has been a journey. We lost all 3 kids. Michael, at the age just before he turned 10, from a seizure one morning early in his bed. And then we lost the youngest of the 3. Christa was 10 and a half, and she succumbed to chronic pneumonia. And then our middle child, Marcia, died at 16 and a half from just an acute bout of pneumonia. So within about a 10-year time frame, we lost all 3 children. Okay. But I have to talk about my oldest son. Okay. And he lived through the death of his 3 siblings by the time he was 20. He did not go to Notre Dame. He went to Princeton, became a religion major, and then went off to medical school. He's now an anesthesiologist. He married his high school sweetheart, and we have 2 grandkids. Okay.
Thank you for sharing that. And thank you for sharing about your 4th child. Cindy, I know we're talking about type C today, but I did read that there's other types of this disease, and it depends on what type you get, whether it shows up in infancy or shows up a little bit later in life, and how long, someone might live with the disease. Since you started the foundation, have there been any changes since it's been a while in mortality rates at all?
When we started the foundation, and there's A, B, and C. And A is kind of an early onset, more at birth. B is a totally different disease. And then there's type C, which is ours. So A and C are pretty similar, just the start of onset. One thing we have noticed is it thought to be always a childhood disease, that typically children were diagnosed in early school age. But because of a lot of our research and exposure, we have now found out that there are young adults that are diagnosed with Niemann-Pick. And it tends to be a psychosis, and they show up in a psychiatrist's office with a psychosis. And it's a much slower progressing disease process, and they live longer. Most children live about 10 years after their diagnosis. So late teens, early adulthood.
So you have that enormous weight of knowing you have so many years. Did you talk to, besides obviously you talked about anger, and that's what sort of launched this foundation and your need to say, where's the research on this, right? But did you reach out to other mothers, parents, people who also had, maybe it wasn't even Niemann-Pick Type C, but other rare childhood disease where they were going through at least somewhat of a similar journey? Or was your focus so much on the foundation at that point that you just, took in the love of, your family and close relatives?
Well, Myrna, this is going to age me. Okay. When we started the foundation, the internet was in its infancy. Okay. So there was no way to connect quickly with other families. We started working with the National Institute of Health, and they knew of other families that had been diagnosed. So that really helped connect us. There was another group that had started called the National Niemann-Pick Disease Foundation, and their mission was to give families support. They weren't doing research, but research at that time was about this much. We knew of 2. We knew some research at the National Institute of Health and a little bit of work at Tufts University. So we brought them to Tucson, and we established a scientific advisory board. Because even though my husband's a physician, he knew that we needed those really brilliant scientists. Not that he's not brilliant, but he's an orthopedic surgeon. We needed somebody that understood a cholesterol problem.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt, Cindy.
I was going to say, we started with these two researchers that weren't really doing much. We just had our recent conference in June. We have so at our first one, there were two researchers. We just had 175 attendees. Wow. So we have really grown the research community and the Niemann-Pick community and bring them together. And I want to say that has produced some great results. One of the things is that we know how the cholesterol moves through the cell now, which was unknown at all. We knew it was a cholesterol disease, but we can actually track the cholesterol. And from that, we are expecting to have 2 drugs approved within the next week. And this will be the first drugs that will be approved for Niemann-Pick. They're not cures. They are help slow down the disease process, but we are working towards what you would call a cure. And we've made some great progress in that area.
Wow. Wow. And a big part of that, this rare disease thing, is getting people to pay attention, right?
Right.
So if this is connected to some of these findings due to your foundation have helped other research areas, right?
Correct. So we know it's a cholesterol storage disorder. So, I mean, you know that cholesterol is involved with other diseases, arteriosclerosis, high cholesterol. I love to give one example of why is so important. There were 2 gentlemen down at UT Southwestern, I think it was in the 60s, early 70s, that were researching another rare disease where children were having cholesterol levels in the thousands and dying from heart attacks at 5 and 6 years old. They mapped out, at that time was thought that the only way we metabolized our cholesterol. Their work led to statins, the most prescribed drug in the United States, right? And they won the Nobel Prize. So they had far-reaching implications. And we think the same thing is true about Niemann-Pick, because we found out that we have another way we all metabolize our cholesterol that is important in these other diseases I've spoken. We've also found out I don't want to get too technical with you, but the gene that's responsible for Niemann-Pick, it's a carrier gene. It carries things in and out of the cell. And when it's defective, it won't take the cholesterol out of the cell. But it has effect in like Ebola, okay? Because it will not carry the virus into the cell. So children, it's thought, that have Niemann-Pick cannot get Ebola. It's been proven in mice. We're not going to go and expose NPC children to Ebola. But the same thing, there's a lot of work going on right now with COVID in the same sense. Now, I'm not going to say that, you can't turn off the NPC gene and restrict other things from getting in, because then you'll end up with Niemann-Pick. But there's a lot of research going on in our gene because of its effect on other diseases.
Which speaks to why the medical community shouldn't ignore disease that only affects a very small portion of the population, because all of these other things can be uncovered. And now you have scientists looking in similar areas, and there's connections out there, right? I mean, that's amazing. That's really amazing.
I think we're going to find that all diseases are genetic in nature and that they're specific to each individual. I mean, women, we all know about the BRCA gene, right?
Yes.
And so I think that we will find that each disease reacts differently to different drugs based on their genetic makeup. And so I think, and I know, because I've been involved with some other research organizations, that that's their goal, is to treat each disease differently for each person.
Oh my goodness. Wow. I mean, this is incredible. It really is incredible. And the fact that you have taken this tragedy and done what you've done to help others, and there may be a cure in sight, must make you feel so good inside, almost like your children are there with you, right? And your heart going, yay, Mom, you did it,
Myrna, it's not me. We're a small family, right? It's the people that have come forth to help us that it just amazes me every single day that people.
You are a catalyst, though, Cindy.
But we kicked a little snowball off the top of a mountain, and it's just gained this momentum and volunteers and researchers, and those are the ones that should get this praise, because that's what's made this possible, is the support we've had.
Yes. And support, collaboration, resilience. If your story isn't one that just screams, I found resilience through this journey, I'm hoping that Dr. Sherry can talk a little bit about that, because I think it goes to your book as well, Sherry, right? So
Yeah.
children, there are certain segments of children who maybe those on the autism spectrum and who have other different issues, who have a really hard time with emotion, seeing emotion in others. And then when they can finally work on that and understand that a little bit better, their lives in general can become more resilient, right? They don't get stuck in fear, in feeling less than, and all of those things, right? So if you can speak a little bit to Cindy, what you know about her and her resilience story, and also your book, that would be great.
Thank you. Um, well, resilience is really a matrix of different strengths. Your ability to cope, your emotional intelligence, and that's what the book fosters. Grit, your ability to stick to it and not give up. And then the fourth pillar of resilience is finding or creating meaning in the situation. So if you can't find it or understand it, you still can create meaning out of a difficult situation or a challenge. That is important. That will help propel you. And these four things together are what foster resilience. Now, the interesting thing about fighting a disease, and especially one that's either chronic or fatal, a lot of the emotional coping has to do with uncertainty.
Yes.
Okay. And one of my sayings that shared with Cindy and other women who are going through such a tragedy, what's the opposite of uncertainty? Well, it's not certainty. The opposite of uncertainty is trusting yourself.
Okay. I like
Okay.
that.
And so in order to trust yourself, one must trust their emotions. So if we grow up in a world, especially as children, where our emotions are judged or invalidated or even benevolently denied, well, don't be afraid. There's nothing to be afraid of. You're a big girl now, okay? Or that's silly. You shouldn't be angry about that. You see, that is well-meaning, but actually it's training the child not to trust their emotions.
Yes, I
So this
understand.
is a lifelong chain of development for resilience that starts with, number one, understanding and trusting your emotions. I hope that makes sense.
That's the springboard. It makes total sense. And if I can segue into something with Cindy through that, you know, as a mom, you had to have been terrified, but you have these three children who are dealing with all of these symptoms and feeling worse as the years go by. So, as a mom, how do you find the strength to keep an upbeat environment and to have your children have happiness even though, you know, they're battling this disease?
I'll tell you, my husband and our first reaction was, well, we're going to take the kids out and show them the world. But we soon quickly realized that's not what they wanted. They wanted to be with their peers. They wanted to be in school. They wanted, to go to their outside activities. And so we just made sure that happened. And we took every day as we've got to make this a special day. Now, I'm not saying we're having a birthday party every day, right? But
Right.
our kids did karate, they did dance, and we just had a network of people that supported us. We had a babysitter that always was there with us, because if you can imagine, with four children, three of them who become disabled, you needed that extra care. And I have to say, the people that were around us that just embraced our journey, from their peers, the very first fundraiser we had was at the school, the elementary school where our kids were located. They decided they're going to have a penny drive. Okay, it wasn't us, it wasn't the administration, it was these children saying, we want to help. They started out a penny drive. They were going to raise 1 million pennies, $10,000. The first year they raised $80,000. So I know. And
wow.
So what it did to those children's esteem, right? And it was interesting watching them as they grew and went through the school process, how they became more sophisticated in their fundraising, but they never gave up. And the support our children had was just amazing. I'm going to give the example of my daughter, Marcia. She developed this friendship with a girl named Perry in kindergarten before she was showing any symptoms. Perry stayed with her to her deathbed. But, she would help us. She would make sure that I was dressing Marcia age appropriately, especially as they approached high school, that I didn't have her in baby doll clothes. And it came time for prom. And a bunch of her friends took her to prom, including Perry. And they said, we're going to take her to the normal going out for dinner before pre-prom dinner, right? And they said, we're going to feed Marcia, even though she had a feeding tube. Marcia had an aide with her, but they had the aide in the corner. They fed her through her feeding tube. They took her to prom. They got her out of her wheelchair and all danced with her.
Oh,
okay, so that's
how
what
wonderful.
I know. And so, and then several of them were with us when Marcia later from acute bout of pneumonia died. Perry just had a baby of her own, and her baby's name is Charlotte Marcia. So Perry is continuing Marcia's legacy. So that's the kind of support we've had from their peers, from our friends, our family. It's been, everyone should experience that kind of, not this way, but it's so amazing out there. And I think there's so much hate going on right now in the world. That I think sometimes that gets lost in the shadow of it, but it's there, and I hope we can all experience it sometime.
And so that support network that was around you and the peer support network that was around your kids, that was a big part of getting through. And then on top of that, you started this foundation desperately trying to find a cure or slow the process so that others don't go through similar experiences that you did. That's wonderful. I want to give you each, I'll start with Sherry, the opportunity to give our listeners some final thoughts. Anything you'd like to say at all, Sherry?
Oh, thank you. I am just so honored to be working with Cindy on this effort to build awareness and also to, provide the book to children that really could benefit from it. And I want to thank Cindy for sharing her story of courage and resilience and hope. And these efforts reflect really a wonderfully diverse community of researchers, fundraisers, caring parents that come together for something bigger than themselves. And as you said, in this day of so much, division, we lose sight of something bigger, that when we work together, come together, we have so much love and so much power. And Cindy's story really brings that home and, brings us to a place of centeredness and grounding. So I'm so glad that we were able to share that with you today.
Me too. And love beats out hate every time, even if it's in the long run, right? Support and love and caring and people helping others with challenges and stepping up to the plate. Absolutely. Cindy, anything else you'd like to say? You can talk a little bit about needs for the foundation, anything that we didn't cover so far today.
Well, even though we've got, these couple of drugs that we think they're going to go across the goal line this week. If not, maybe tomorrow. The FDA has a deadline that they have to report on this. So I'm thinking it's coming. But we still need your support. You know, these are therapies, they're not a cure, and we've got to keep all the researchers out there moving forward. And then I'm going to say one last thing, and that's a huge thank you. And I'll start with Sherry. Sherry, thank you for spreading the word, for supporting us. Your kindness and generosity just has no bounds. And Myrna, thank you for not only having us on this, but for what you do for women in general. It's just so needed, and I respect you. And then a big thank you to our friends, our family, to the Notre Dame community, to the Niemann-Pick family community. That's what's lifted us up and held us going for all this time. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Oh, and thank you too for joining me today. Really, what an uplifting, feel-good, hopeful conversation this was, really, even though we're talking about tragic circumstances. And I hope the message got through that research for rare disease is so, so important. And the connections that are made with other research that's being done and the doors that can open is just amazing. So thank you so much, both of you. I will close as I always do by wishing all of our listeners and our readers good health, happiness, and continued inspiration. Thank you so much for joining us today.